Welcome to the Knee Reaction. This is an occasional series from Evangelical Alliance Ireland where we look at a contentious issue, an issue where people are reacting in the heat of the moment. And we don't want to bring a knee-jerk reaction, and we don't want to be jerks. And so we come from a place from being on our knees in prayer, and after praying over a subject, try to bring a biblical perspective that will help us see what's happening, get a better handle on it, but also get a sense of what God would have to say into this situation. And today we're talking about something that happened on the 16th of May on the streets of Dublin when a young Congolese man called Yves Sakila lost his life on Henry Street. And the situation was he was apprehended by store security personnel outside the Arnott's department store. And as he was being restrained, it ended up with him losing his life. And to get a bit more of the background to this story, I spoke with Remba Osengo. Remba is a Congolese pastor. He's been ministering in Ireland now for many, many years. In fact, my first contact with Remba was he brought a team of young Congolese guys from his church in Dublin and brought them up to Drogheda, and we had a football match between the guys in one of the local housing estates in Drogheda and the Congolese lads. And long before we had a multicultural church in Drogheda, this was really a very powerful moment. So I asked Remba to tell us just what went on from his perspective that day on Henry Street.
As you said yourself, this is a very tragic death. And then it's really very sad for the community, and then everybody's upset about this, and especially the family and all the community, even the Irish community as well. Yeah. What happened was that there are some few days ago, that young boy, his name is Yves Sakila. He went to Arnold shop. But exactly, we don't know the full detail what took place there. But according to the security personnel, they said that there was something like shoplifting, but we don't know exactly if that's true or not. Yeah. And then the time that he tried to run away, and he went outside, and then he was followed by the security personnel. And it's where he went to bump with an elderly person of 80 years old, and from there he fell. When he fell himself and all security personnel, there were more than 6, and they did jump on top of him. And then if you saw the video exactly, you saw exactly how they apply some torture, like at the time of the Gestapo, and then that was really the remark of George Floyd in America. They did exactly what they did in George Floyd. They just put the knee on the neck, yeah, and then until the guy died. So we very upset about this, and then there was the excessive use of force by the security personnel. In fact, they should arrest him, and then if there is a problem, they should call the Gardaí and pass it on to the Gardaí. But I think no one is allowed really just to take the life of somebody, no matter what the person did. So this is exactly what happened. And then, as we said from the beginning, all the community, we are very upset. And then they said, this is very disgusting. And then we don't want this kind of thing to happen again in this country.
Okay, so there's some perspective from Pastor Remba. Now, I would add the fact that obviously people are innocent until proved guilty. But nevertheless, it is a fact that Yves Sakila did have a criminal record, including shoplifting, and apparently had been already convicted of shoplifting from that same Arnott's store. When he was fleeing from the store, some have wondered whether he knocked the old man down or whether it's security guards chasing him that knocked the old man down. Either way, by the way, the old man, and here's again just where there's an intersection with our evangelical community, the old man that was knocked over is actually a retired evangelical pastor who was on the street at the time giving out gospel leaflets and sharing about his faith, and obviously was quite seriously injured in this incident. But if you've seen the videos and there are videos going out there online, and it's pretty harrowing watching what happened to Yves with these, surrounded by a bunch of heavyset guys kneeling on his neck. And obviously many people have drawn comparisons with the George Floyd incident in the United States. Now, this was not with members of the police. These were private security personnel from the store. But a lot of people have seen those parallels and have made note of it. And the reaction within the Congolese community has been very hurt, outraged, concerned. And again, I asked Remba to just explain a little bit about the reaction within the community and how some of his fellow Congolese people are seeing this.
Yeah, well, it just when we look at it people disagree by the use of the excessive use of force, that the first thing, and then that can happen to anybody.
Yeah.
We didn't want only just to bring it on the racial element about this, but we don't know the intention of those security personnel. If they did it because it was black, that we don't know. We cannot really emphasize on.
And we shouldn't just presume that that's the case.
Yeah, that's why. So that's why we say the act, the way that they use, the exercise, that the use of the need on the neck and this kind of thing was unacceptable. So that if they can do it to anybody, it's really disgraceful. It's not right. So when I know that the feeling are very divided, other people can think, oh, they did it simply because he's black, but other people they can condemn some political discourse recently, where people try to point to a specific ethnic group, just recently on we saw this kind of a political discourse going on around. But sometimes politicians are using immigration, just as an excuse when they fail to provide better services to the people who elected them. But we are not going into that road. But I would like just to show that how the incident was not acceptable, and then we don't know if we can look at this on the racial, as a racism or what. We don't know exactly, and then we cannot conclude that, okay, if it was a black man or a white person, how the reaction could be, we don't know exactly.
Yeah.
But we try to focus on what we saw that day. Was a young black man was mistreated by security personnel, and then there is excessive use of force instead of allowing the guardie to come to take him. So I think on my side, and then I think even in the community, all of us, we try to share the same view. We don't really accept what happened. Even if they did it on a racial basis, but that cannot be accepted. But we don't want to go into that on that road. But we would like just to focus on what we saw, the attitude of those people. I think probably one day when they will be brought to justice, and then we will know exactly, if it was racially motivated or what. We don't know exactly.
Now, as Remba said there, we do not have evidence of racism here. And we need to be very careful. Sometimes we can be very quick to jump onto this, say this is a racist thing that this happened. But we don't have evidence of that at the moment. And we need to trust that a full inquiry will take place. I mean, with the video footage and everything else, if there is any evidence there, it will come out in due time. But let's not prejudge these issues. And we should stress that this is not the first time that people have been killed by security personnel outside of private premises. A similar thing actually happened in Christmas 2024 in Temple Bar. And this time, you may not have heard about this, but actually the inquest in this case started just a few days after Yves' death. And this time it was a Romanian guy who got into an altercation with security personnel outside a club in Temple Bar. And he was, again, somebody knelt on his neck, he was restrained, and he ended up losing his life as well. So we could say that there is an issue with people overstepping boundaries in restraining somebody or trying to keep them until the police come. And that's not necessarily a racist thing. It happens to people of different races and different nationalities. In fact, there has been another case recently in Ireland where a businessman was sent to prison. And the reason why he was imprisoned was there had been a break-in at one of his premises. He went down to where the break-in had occurred, found some teenagers hanging about nearby, and it turned out that these teenagers were not the ones who had broken in, but he assumed that they had been, and basically falsely imprisoned them, threatened them with hair-raising threats, and caused an awful lot of upset. And that chap ended up going to prison for his actions in what was seen as being an overreaction. Now, I'm going to add a personal perspective to this because just a month ago, one of my neighbours had an attempted break-in at his property. And I've watched the video footage of this. My neighbour shared it with us. And he basically had three young guys with balaclavas on in broad daylight climbed over the gates into his property, intending to break into the house. And then as you watch the footage, the next thing you see is these three young guys all charging back and out over the gate, and my neighbour chasing after them. And I'll be honest with you, my first reaction was fair play to him, chasing three guys with balaclavas. And I thought, you know what? Well, that would probably be my first reaction if I felt my home was being invaded. But then my next thought was, well, if I caught one of these guys, what would I think I would do to them? And I can see how it could be very easy to overstep the mark. And what goes beyond a legitimate defense of your property or trying to protect a store where you are employed as a security guard can turn into something else. And again, that's an issue that we need to be aware of. When does just trying to protect your own property or the property of your employer become vigilantism and become something that's become dangerous and endangering somebody else's life? So these are all issues. This is, sometimes these things that happen are not so simple that there's just goodies and baddies involved in it. And there's very real people and very real tragedies, and all of these events affect people's lives in a permanent way. Now, I can understand why the people within the Congolese community would immediately feel that there was a racist element to this, partly because just the optics of the thing, when you watch the video, and it is reminiscent of what happened with George Floyd. Just it's difficult to not see the resemblances when you see this played out in front of you. But there's also the fact that it came at a moment which was a moment of pain and hurt among the Congolese community, because only a few days earlier, while there was a by-election taking place in central Dublin, there was an incident took place where the former Taoiseach of our country, Bertie Ahern, who's somebody, by the way, who has a bit of a checkered past. I mean, there was allegations made about Bertie years ago, but also we have to acknowledge he was one of the architects of the Good Friday Agreement that has produced peace in Northern Ireland. And so Bertie did a lot of positive things for our country as well. But he was filmed without his knowledge or consent when canvassers were coming round the doors. And Bertie basically said that, he said, well, you know, there is too much immigration. He said, I don't mind Ukrainians. It's okay, Ukrainians coming in, but we shouldn't have any more Africans coming in. And then he specifically spoke about Congolese. He said, we don't want any more people from the Congo coming in. And I can understand why the Congolese community would feel under attack and feeling that they were already encountering racism when you have the former leader of our nation saying that. And then just a couple of days later, this incident happens on the street. Now, Pastor Remba, whenever I spoke with him, he did make comparison that we actually, both the Congolese people and the Irish people, do have a shared history of being at the sharp end of racism. He talks about when there used to be signs in London that said, what was it? No dogs, no blacks, and no Irish. And, I did go and live in London for a while whenever there was still a bit of that going on. But I have to say this, the racism and the discrimination that I've experienced when I was an Irish person living in London is nothing like what some Congolese people have faced here in Ireland. Now, I don't believe Ireland is a racist country, and Remba makes that point himself. But I don't believe Ireland is a racist country compared to many other countries. But there is racism here. And no matter how much of it occurs, when it does happen, it is deeply, deeply hurtful. In fact, I will never forget a time when I was leading a prayer meeting in Drogheda. And we were talking about racism, and a number of our African members of our congregation were in that prayer meeting. I remember saying, look, I know some of you would know a lot more about this than me because you may sometimes encounter racism and racist comments. And at that point, a friend of mine who was there, Elias, great guy, Elias from the Congo, great Christian brother, huge big guy, by the way. I remember Elias going with us on a missions trip to China, and we walked through Tiananmen Square, and Elias was just towering over every Chinese person in Tiananmen Square. And we ended up surrounded by hundreds of Chinese people. They thought he was some famous basketball player, and we're all reaching out and trying to touch him, which was an amazing experience. But Elias, that day in the prayer meeting, he just exploded. He said, Pastor, he said, it's not sometimes, it's every single day. And he was working as a bus driver on Dublin bus. And he began to explain to me how every single day he received racial abuse just trying to do his job in order to feed his family. And it's for those of us that don't face that, it's easy for us to underestimate the hurt that is caused by racism. And we are living at a time where people expressing racist attitudes, it seems to be more acceptable. It's become more common. On social media, I see people saying things on social media that make my hair stand on end. And I say, how are people allowed to say things like that in a public forum? And nobody seems to stop it. So racism is tremendously hurtful. And there's no doubt at all that the Congolese community has experienced that. And it was a very sensitive time for the community whenever this incident with young Yves occurred on Henry Street. So it's quite natural that that community would immediately start saying, is this another incident to do with racism? Now, it does seem like there's a number of different things all coming together. And I think that's how things that really stir people up emotionally in public, it's often not just one event. It's a number of things happening at the same time. Because round about the same time that Yves lost his life, there was another guy lost his life on the streets of Dublin. A guy called Alex Coughlin was... I believe it was an attempted robbery, and he was then stabbed and killed. And he was a white guy killed by two black teenagers. And so some people have been very much trying to set the two incidents side by side. And they're saying, well, hang on. How come there's these marches about Yves losing his life and there wasn't anyone out marching and protesting about Alex losing his life? I think, however, there is a fundamental difference here, and it's this. We should be absolutely appalled anytime somebody is killed. I mean, there's no hierarchy of grief whenever somebody loses their life and a family is grieving. But it is true that there is a greater reaction whenever we see not just the fact that somebody has been killed, but there's an abuse of power involved in the process. If we would have a protest march every time somebody is very unjustly and crudely killed, we would basically be marching almost every day because too many of these incidents are happening. But there is a particular public reaction whenever we're talking about abuse of power, if it's the police or if it's a government or if it's somebody in a role of authority. And that can be somebody has a role of authority over you because they're the store detectives in a store, or it could be a pastor, it could be a teacher, it could be a politician. But when we see an abuse of power, that does stir up more of a public reaction. It doesn't mean one person's death is more important than somebody else's. All deaths are an absolute tragedy, but it does mean that this extra thing about an abuse of power is coming in. And so that's why I don't think it's right to try and play one death off against the other. That's just a course of action that would stir up racial hatred, racial disharmony. And we need to talk about the abuse of power. That is a vital issue that we talk about. But we also need to talk about, is it right that shoplifters, for example, should be able to steal from a store and not be challenged and just walk away? Where do you draw the line between stopping somebody, apprehending somebody, waiting for the police to come and committing an act of violence against somebody? And that's all part of this story. So what is our role in all of this? How can we react well to this? Well, I did ask Pastor Remba about the Congolese churches, because there are a number of Congolese churches. I'm in touch with quite a few of them. I know many Congolese Christians. So I asked him the role that churches, evangelical churches, are playing in the Congolese community in Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, just as you say yourself, the churches will be like the key, the key or the key point that will bring the community together, because we have also an association called CCI. In French, it would be like the Congolese community of Ireland. Okay, we have a group like that. But if you see the majority, it's just churches that bring in community together, and it's a place where people not only worship, but they came to socialize as well.
Yeah.
And then it's a place where we try to help one another. And then the church play together with the community. We play like a support, to the different people. And then could be on immigration side, could be housing and different areas where the church is playing a specific role in terms of just bringing the Congolese community together. So the church at the moment within the community is very vital, is playing a vital role in bringing the community together.
So we need to pray. We need to pray for the Congolese community. We need to pray for all of our communities in Ireland. We need to pray for those communities in the inner city where there is a lot of crime, where there is sometimes a lot of tension. And so we need to very much pray into these situations. But I believe something else that we need to do, we need to encourage our neighbours. I would encourage you, if you know Congolese people in the church, or if it's neighbours of yours or whatever else, just let them know that you're thinking of them. Let them know that you care. Sometimes just being aware that they're not isolated and that the rest of us are concerned about what they're going through and some of the problems that they face, that can be a huge help. But I think the other thing that we can do as evangelical believers is we need to be dialing back the rhetoric. Instead of making things more hostile, we need to be saying, how can we bring some of the peace of God into this situation? Because I think out of this whole story, there's a lot of different factors here, a lot of causes for concern. But one of the things that really concerns me has been the fact that I have seen people that I know are evangelical Christians who are falling into the trap of taking one side or the other, taking a partisan side. And this seems to be happening more and more, particularly on social media. You know, we need to be able to, whenever we see one person expressing one point of view, saying, well, hang on, I don't quite see it that way. And then being able to have a conversation about it. But sadly, it seems that that's getting harder and harder to do because people want to lay out a partisan position, which then involves mocking anyone who sees it differently. And if you express an alternate point of view, then basically you're bad, you're evil, and Satan is using you. So we need to be very careful about that. I've actually had to unfriend a couple of people on social media, people who I know profess to be evangelical Christians, and yet the things that they were saying were just so downright nasty on this issue that I thought, I really don't want to be looking at that. And it really grieved me. And so that's why we at Evangelical Alliance Ireland are bringing these occasional knee reactions, is because these are issues that we need to talk about. Sometimes it's hard for pastors to talk about them. They're worried about causing offense to people and causing rows. And sometimes that causes us to dodge the issues and avoid the issues. But I don't believe that's the way of Jesus. And I believe one of the reasons why Evangelical Alliance is here is so that we can bring a measured response to some of the contentious things that happen in society. We're not always going to agree on these issues, but we need to be able to disagree in a way that still looks like Jesus. And we need to make an effort to see the other side's point of view. Time will tell whether the death of Yves Sakila had a racist component to it or not. We'd certainly say he was no angel. He had had difficulties in his life with crime, with drug addiction, with homelessness. But nevertheless, we don't want to see anybody losing their life in any of these kind of circumstances, as we've seen too often recently in our capital city here in Ireland. So let's pray into this situation. And let's, again, when we speak into these situations, pray before we speak so that we can look and sound more like Jesus. Thanks for joining us for this knee reaction from Evangelical Alliance Ireland. EAI is working on your behalf to equip, connect and represent the Church of Jesus Christ in our nation, providing resources and speaking into spaces where God's people need to be heard in our society today.
I'm here to ask you to join our mission. We're looking for 1,000 people who will commit to giving just a pinch more than the price of a cup of coffee per month. By using this QR code, you can sign up to support the work of EAI with just €5 per month.
It is so important at a time like this to have a Christian perspective being spoken boldly into the political and social spheres in which we are living. Why? Because when we are together, we thrive, we grow, we make a difference.
Your generosity is needed to keep our mission moving forward. Be one of the 1,000, just €5 a month. God bless you.